Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit. If you were on from the beginning, you'll see that, yes, we took a couple weeks off and my fingers hit the wrong buttons in the wrong order, but we're still here. For anyone that's new to Blabbit, Blabbit is where we bring experts in to ask questions, find out some of their secrets without paying them any money. Isn't that a blast?
Nice.
My name's Glenn Ingram. I'm one of the co-hosts of Blabbit. I've been working with and helping salespeople develop better listing traits so they can be better influencers for the last 2 decades. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Glenn. It's great to see you, and I hope everyone is well rested after the holiday weekend and ready to get back into it. I know we are, and as ever, we are proud to be sponsored by Open Doors, your comprehensive corporate communication platform for employee engagement. Get the conversation started and watch productivity rise. Oh, yes. And by the way, my name is Paul Geiger. For anyone who's tuning in for the first time, I am a public speaking consultant and a presentation expert out of New York City. I work with people on how to get over any public speaking anxiety, how to be more clear, and how to get rid of any of those unwanted speech habits so that they can be very, very persuasive in business. And we have a returning guest with us here today on today's Blabbit, and that would be Mr. Keyan Razi. Keyan, tell everybody about yourself.
Hey, everybody. Hey, guys, gentlemen, I appreciate you having me on again. It's always a blast. And every time, Paul, I see your background, it reminds me to go watch The King's Speech again because I love that movie.
Good stuff.
So, my name is Keyan Razi. I'm based out of Houston, Texas. I am an online marketer, a technologist, but also a real estate investor. And I think since the last time I spoke with you guys, we have grown significantly in our real estate business. So we're buying and selling nationwide, helping families, helping investors have good opportunities for investment, and really just, getting into this current day market and seeing how things are changing and helping a lot of different people. So it's a really fascinating space, and we're super grateful to be involved.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. Well, let's just jump in real estate with both feet then, Keyan. So in this changing market, we saw it change going in one direction through 2020 and 2021, and now it seems to be going a little different direction, maybe a correction some people may be stating. What are you seeing as far as real estate prices across the country here in September 2022?
Yeah, so across the country, it seems like in most markets, especially markets that had increased significantly back in April, May, they are definitely having price reductions and longer times on the market. And so you'll find that in hotter markets, like Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, things like that, you're seeing that type of effect. Now, there's other things at play too. It's not as simple as just, is the market going up or down across the board? It's actually based on where are people looking to go to? What are they interested in? What's the trend? And so you'll see markets like Florida, they're still super hot, right? So rents are going to keep going up. Houses are still going to get flipped really quickly. And, people are still migrating in from other states. So for us, we've seen that most areas are having some price reductions. The smaller the town, the less likely to have any sort of change like that. In fact, in certain states, we're seeing that it's super interesting, actually. Pennsylvania is one of our favorite states because there is such a shortage in available housing and rent rates are just still really high. So, you would think that those types of factors would actually be reduced in the current market, but the demand is still there. So every state's a little bit different and every market's a little bit different.
Now, when you talk about supply and demand, do you find or do you believe that, let's go back a little bit and look historically, was it because of a slowdown in the home building, in the contracting business that occurred a couple of years ago? Or is it just by nature? Let's take Pennsylvania, for example. Why is there such a shortage in housing? Is it would that be considered a hot market? There's more demand in Pennsylvania, and what are the forces causing that?
That's a great question, and I think there's multiple variables that go into it. I think the slowdown with building definitely played a factor because there's usually a time delay. There's usually a 2 to 4 year time delay when new homes have been developed or new apartment complexes have been developed, and you'll see that finally hit the market. And so there was a delay because COVID stopped production in a lot of ways. Prices on labor have increased since then. Shortage of materials have increased since then. Right now, it's actually a contractor's market. The contractor is the one setting the price. So developers and investors are not really in control of that type of thing, especially because most people aren't aware of how involved development and building and rehabs really are. So contractors really can control the market for investors right now. And then you also have to factor in, just job shifts, the Great Resignation. Certain places like Pennsylvania, I would consider is sort of a hidden hot market because it doesn't have that sort of sexy finesse as like Florida does or Texas does right now, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of people there, and there's a lot of people that, and here's another variable, there are a lot of people that are finding it very difficult to find a home to own. One, because they were never really taught about credit, and so they can't really take advantage of bank mortgages. And secondly, because hedge funds have identified that this is a really prime time to start buying a lot of houses. So they've been buying houses like crazy for the last couple of years. And only recently, most of them kind of slowed down because they wanted to see where the market goes. But what that means is there's a lot less ownership opportunities for people, for individuals and families, because they're mostly being picked up by investors or hedge funds, and they're not really trying to sell. They're trying to hold on to those assets.
And they're holding on to them as rental properties?
In most cases, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back to kind of what you said, it's kind of interesting area to area, the differences. I know throughout history where you have places that you have mountains, so you have steep increases in prices, steep decreases, versus some areas where you have rolling hills, so it goes up and down a little bit. I know Las Vegas, for one, since I've been out there for a few years, it's kind of funny where you talk about the contractors and stuff like that. There's a company there they're the largest home builder in the country that was very arrogant 6 months ago, and were making you make bids on things and go back and forth, and you couldn't buy anything until it was ready to be finished. Now they've got almost 300 houses on the market in Las Vegas. So that's come full circle. So it does kind of vary about where you're at. What advice would you give to somebody if they're looking at an area or maybe considering relocating, as far as what are some maybe key point indicators as far as what area is good to move to versus others for a long-term investment?
Yeah, I think part of it really depends on an individual's income level. It depends on some of the preferences that they have about where they want to live, and also if they have any sort of footprint in that market, right? If they've got family, friends, things like that, or job opportunities. Right now, I'm noticing that a lot of folks who are sort of in the more of a labor-intensive like workforce, they're starting to move back towards their hometowns or smaller areas. For example, a seller that I was just working with this morning, he's moving from Alabama to Flint, Michigan, which is kind of a famous city for everybody now, but that's his hometown. So he's got family there. He knows he can get work there. There's a house that's perfect for him there. So he's moving back to those smaller areas where they can still find work. Houses aren't nearly as expensive or tough to attain as more like most of the major Texas cities or Florida or things like that. And so, it's really important to look at what's going to be affordable, especially in today's interest rates if you're getting a bank mortgage. And then also kind of project, if there's an influx of people coming in from other states, you will fairly easily be able to identify if getting a home is going to be difficult. Like if you're competing with a lot of people who are trying to enter that particular area, then there's a pretty high chance that you're still competing against people paying cash and overbidding. There's still some of that going on. And it just depends on where it is. It depends on, the specific cities. I think Houston still has quite a lot of that. So most houses in Houston aren't lasting more than 30 days, which is better than the previous, 10 days. But it's about 30 days, and people are coming in because it's so much cheaper than New York and California. So some of those factors you'd really want to look at.
So what you're saying is, as people move from California to other places, they bring the same incompetence and impracticalness with them to other places and screw things up?
Your words, not mine.
So talking about geographics here, we pretty much have most of the country covered. I know that Glenn, you're actually in the Midwest now, but normally out on the West Coast, and Keyan, you're in the Central Time Zone. I'm on the East. Let me understand something about the area that I'm in right now, which was it got pretty turned on its head back in 2020 and on into 2021, but we're sort of going back to the way things were. Do the same rules apply with corporate real estate? I mean, is that taking a lot more of a dive than private?
Now, are you talking about like commercial properties?
Yeah, like commercial properties and people. I understand that slowly but surely people are going back to work, if not for an entire week, for a couple of days. How is that affecting the market in your observation?
I'm not really seeing too much of an effect from our standpoint. Okay. I would say that for the most part, I'm seeing more people identifying that they need to find a house with some space as opposed to being in an apartment because of what they experienced during 2020. Um, from a commercial standpoint, I haven't really seen. We don't deal too much in commercial right now, but I haven't really seen that much of a difference. However, I do know that there's still quite a bit of opportunity. People that are investing in commercial properties, there's still so much opportunity to actually pick up an office building, a self storage, a strip mall, things like that that are underperforming and maybe mom and pop owned. So from the investor's world, there are typical assets that people used to invest in. For example, multifamily was the prime thing to get into 20, 30 years ago. Now cap rates on multifamily are so low that in most cases it doesn't really make sense as a smaller investor. So people have moved towards mobile home parks, RV parks, self-storage, office buildings are a pretty good opportunity still. So there's a lot of those other commercial assets that are really good and still have the returns that multifamily used to have 20 years ago. That's what we've seen
Yeah.
so far.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting, and it varies so much, like you said, state to state. Because like in California, where we spent some time in the past few years, multifamily is very interesting to me because in the same neighborhood, same track, what your price per square foot is for single family, it's so much less for multifamily for the
Mhm.
headache you're going to absorb for dealing with it. So in some areas like Southern California, buying multifamily for someone getting into it makes more sense because they can have someone paying part of their rent, so they're not paying $5,000 a month for a house. Maybe they're paying $3,000.
Right.
And when you take a look at that, there's some special mortgages out there. If you can find something under 1.8 million, has revenue coming in, stuff like that, where you're based on your credit score versus your income, because the property is always also producing your income. So there's a lot of little different nuances when you start getting into that more than just a single family. So are there any other things like that you ran into, like with multifamily and stuff like that, that are kind of odd or whatever that the average person wouldn't think about?
Yeah, I mean, what you're mentioning, essentially people call it house hacking, right? They're staying in one unit and somebody else is paying the mortgage in a different unit. I think that you have to be really careful about that because, for example, in California, you can easily overpay for a property and that other unit doesn't cover the note, right? So the investors sort of have like a formula to look for, make sure that certain level of income is coming in to pay for the taxes. Like in Texas, property taxes are high because we don't have income tax. So you have to factor that in, and you have to factor in insurance for the property, and then maintenance, things like that. So that's one thing to look for. But house hacking is a good opportunity. Personally, I do stay away from multifamily right now, and the reason is because it's got different economics involved. You also have a lot more to do with evictions. If you're finding that people are no longer able to pay for that rent, especially in California, that's tough to deal with. So we are mostly focused on single family because we offer individuals a rent to owner finance opportunity. And so in our agreements, they basically say, we're not doing a year-long lease while you're doing a rent to own. It's a month-to-month agreement. And they're putting money down to be able to lock in that purchase price and move into that home. And they are responsible for the maintenance repairs. So what we make as the homeowner is actual cash flow because we're not having to factor in as much vacancy rates, maintenance, repairs, things like that. And also they're having the opportunity to own the house. So they want to take care of the house. And by putting some money down up front and allowing them to build up their down payment to do an owner finance in about a year to 2 years, they're actually more motivated to stay in the house. So we have to do less with evictions. We have to do less with foreclosures. And so it's a lot easier for us to, one, find the right person and not have to deal with eviction court. And two, give investors an opportunity because they can invest per house. So we don't buy the house ourselves. We don't put any money out of pocket. Investors can invest in that particular property that's secured in a first position lien. So we're not doing funds and buying multifamily complexes. It's a lot simpler than what people are doing with limited partners and general partners and buying big complexes.
Well, this is interesting. I really want to delve even a little bit more deeper into this. Glenn started the idea of creative funding, and I know you mentioned earlier, Keyan, about bank mortgages. What and you just gave us an example of something that is a little bit different. Now, does that scenario actually filter through a bank as well, or is it through an investment fund that the money you put the money together to acquire the loan on the property?
Yeah. So with our particular model, and I guess we lost Paul for a second. Okay, you're back.
He wanders around sometimes.
Yeah, he just goes off.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. I just kind of freeze, just to keep people on their toes, I guess.
Well, I want to make sure you get your answer, so I'm checking it.
Yeah.
But no.
I'm alive.
Yeah. So with our particular model, we have a couple of advantages by working with individual investors than using a fund. So we don't necessarily start up a fund and raise capital into one big pool. We actually do have a 1-to-1 ratio, one investor per property. Okay. And so when we buy the house, we give that investor an opportunity to park some capital into the house and receive interest only payments for a length of time. It can be anywhere between 5 and 12 years or shorter if the buyer ends up ultimately buying the house or paying it off or using a bank mortgage. So why do we do that? And the reason is because it provides secure, reliable income for that investor. So if something were to happen, let's say my entire company just disappears, and what happens to their money? So they have the option to actually take that house, which is worth more than they invested, and take ownership of it and either sell it or keep the note or do something and get their money back. So in fact, a lot of people like to invest in that just because it's more secure than a lot of other investments out there. It doesn't change with the market. It doesn't really fluctuate based on the real estate market. And it's essentially just parking money and getting a solid interest, reliable and predictable interest on their money. So it just grows over time.
Now, are there restrictions? Are there states that restrict you being able to do that? Or is it a wide open field, 50 states in the US?
No, it's as far as I know, it's totally wide open. But different states have different ways to do it. So in most cases, when we're buying a house, it's not a problem. We can use a private investor and we can use their funds to close on the house. When we go to sell the house, let's say we're owner financing it to a buyer, somebody who wants to finance the house from us rather than using a bank loan, then sometimes we'll have to do some special, dance and Macarena for the state to make sure that everything is kosher and they're okay with it. So, for example, Texas will require that we use an RMLO, and we create a note in a proper way using the proper channels and people who are licensed to create them to protect the buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always interesting as some of these cycles that you kind of mentioned with Paul asked about commercial and stuff like that. I know if you look at over the last 20 years, when building goes down for private property or homes, private always goes up, the building always goes up for commercial. Mm-hmm. And then you have the kind of balancing act where the builders were really in control, because when you had limited supply in the last 2 years, well, then if I can't buy a house I want, I'm going to build one. When you start having more supply, then it's cheaper to buy a house than to build it. Then the contractors have to kind of adjust and balance out and come back down with their pricing. So I know there were some issues with not say tariffs, but money that we were charging Canada to ship lumber and stuff like that in. Have you seen in a lot of these states where now we're finally getting back to where it's cheaper to buy than to build, and that cycle's kind of expired? Or what are you seeing from buying versus building existing?
Right now in the way that we're operating in real estate, we're not we're not really looking too much at the building side. I would say that I know that the prices for materials have come down. There are more contractors available to doing, rehab work or new build work. But because of that lull in the cycle, a lot of those homes that are being built, they're taking a lot longer, right? Because they're not ready. They weren't able to start due to the cost of material, labor force, and everything that had happened with the blockages in supply chain. But I've also seen that a lot of new developments that have been coming up or are expected to be completed in the next 3 to 6 months, they're priced for the market that we had in April.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing is, I think a lot of folks were waiting. A lot of folks with money were waiting for something to come up, and so they're actually, even though the home might be a little bit overpriced, they're so fed up with waiting that they're willing to pay the price, and especially depending on where the area is at, right? Because if the development is a new master plan and it's outside the city and it has a lot of space, it has um, playgrounds for the kids, pools, different things available to them. They were so traumatized by being stuck in COVID that they're willing to pay the price to have extra space and extra land.
Now, one thing they have to be aware of that, and I'll just talk from my previous experience of building a brand new home in a brand new addition and being the first one in there, is you better plan on staying there for a while, because you constantly have competition to sell your home that's brand new, no one's lived in, at the same price. So if you're not willing to stay there for a while, that may not be the best solution.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Um, the other thing is, so Paul, you also asked about the buyer side. Are they going through a bank mortgage as well when we're doing the owner finance? And to answer that question, we're giving them two options. So they have the option to do a rent to own, which most of them actually take. So they can rent for a year while they build their down payment, and then at the end of that year, they can either extend it or they can choose to purchase the home. And when they purchase that home, they can choose to either use a bank mortgage, which means they had time to repair or build their credit, and sometimes we'll actually help them do that. Or they can use owner financing from us. And up front, I tell them owner financing from us is a great option if you don't want to deal with a bank or you don't have the ability to. It is a more expensive option. So if you wanted to use a bank loan, and if you could get one, that would save you money overall. And if you ended up owner financing with us, you could always refinance with a bank loan. So we give them a lot of options. What we find is, especially in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Ohio, states like that, a lot of them were never really educated on how to build and use credit. A lot of them also don't want to deal with banks. I think they just had some historical experience there. And so a lot of them prefer to do the owner finance option, which we're happy to do. And so that's why we do actually use private investor loans, because we can buy that house and we have the option to owner finance.
Now, what about in the case of someone going through this process, then let's call it the non-bank process, for lack of a better word. I'm sure you have a better term for it. But let's refer to that, and the idea that what happens if you decide you want to move? Is there a sweet spot for owning the property? Is it 5 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 7 years before it makes sense? Or do you even have the option to sell the property once you go into an agreement with you? Like, I know, Glenn was talking about that a little bit. You better be willing to stay there for a little while. And we all know, just in a very general sense, that with most bank mortgages, just based on historical analysis of real estate, you have to stay in a property about 5 years to build up any sort of meaningful equity, unless you hit a skyrocketing market. But what is that? Do you follow similar guidelines in the funding that you guys do?
So what's really interesting about that is one caveat that we have with these houses that we buy is that we typically do not fix them up. So when we buy a house from somebody, it's usually got some outdated things. It needs some love because it's got some wear and tear. Sometimes they're in worse shape than you would expect, and sometimes they're not so bad. And what we do is we give the new buyers an option to essentially get a discount on the house for them doing the work themselves. And there's two benefits to that. One, we don't have to come out of pocket to actually do repairs and rehabs and take a lot more time and deal with contractors. And the other benefit is that they can totally do what they want with the house for cheaper. And they probably won't like, honestly, what I pick out for the wall color anyway. So it's better if they do it.
Mhm.
So what that means is most of the people that are buying our houses are intending for that to be their long-term home. And mostly it's because one, they are going to customize it for their families and they're going to hold it long term, and two, because the availability for them to buy a house, like actually own the house without going through the bank or with their credit or where their location's at. For example, in certain cities in Pennsylvania, um, they don't want to give it up. They don't want to sell it because they're going to have a hard time finding another home to buy. But if they did decide to sell it, they have a lot of options. In fact, because they're working with us, they have a little bit more flexibility than most. I can actually buy that house back from them. And because we're in the creative real estate niche, we can actually do a lot of things that are atypical. An example of that would be one of the people who bought our house, rent to own in Ohio. He had a house, but it was under his mother's name, who had passed away, and it was in foreclosure. So he couldn't actually cure the loan because he wasn't on the mortgage. And so he traded his foreclosure house to us in order to get into the new house that he would stay in. So we have situations like that where we can help them, trade houses. We can get really creative about the finances. We can get creative. For example, the seller that I was dealing with today, he was taking the proceeds from his house to buy another house in Flint, Michigan. And I offered to go and find a house on the market, negotiate it down, buy it, and trade that in exchange for the proceeds that he would have received. So he would end up with a better house because we know how to negotiate with sellers and really give them benefits to working with us over an agent or traditional sale. And I can get him a better house and a better deal. So there's a lot of interesting things we can do in creative real estate.
And obviously, just one more quick one, Glenn. Obviously, you know all the ins and outs that a real estate agent would know. You know all the criteria and the compliance that needs to be taken care of to make all of that work.
Yeah, it's actually a lot easier than most people would think. It's the real estate the real estate industry surprisingly doesn't have that many things locked down in, like, you can only do it this way or only do it this way. In fact, the people who are locked down to structural limitations like that are typically licensed individuals. So realtors, mortgage originators, brokers, home inspectors, things like that. They're actually stuck with a limited set of things that they can do. But us working in the investment field, we have to essentially stick to what does the state allow, but we can get really creative in a lot of different transactional things as long as we do the paperwork right. We close with a title company or an attorney. Everything is done contractually legitimate. We check the proper chain of ownership on our property, things like that. Then we can get super creative.
Well, and when you look at this, and let's say we have a crystal ball, let's say that the economy is going to go down like some people are predicting over the next year. So for people who don't have the down payment to go traditional, people that may not have the credit to go traditional, and as these interest rates keep ticking up, a lot of people don't understand that for every percentage rate the interest rate goes up on a traditional mortgage, for the same amount of income, you can buy 10% afford 10% less of a house. So quite possibly, couldn't this be a better option for a certain subset of our people, our community, to be able to do something like this that probably can't qualify for traditional mortgage, can't get the home they want in a traditional mortgage, and they're maybe struggling to afford the rents in some of these areas?
Absolutely. I think that so when we're doing an owner finance or we're offering rent to own to buyers, our buyer pool is essentially 300 to 400% larger because there's so many people who cannot get a bank mortgage. Either it's because they're self-employed, or they didn't have the same job for long enough, or there was a little bit of a gap, or they just have a debt to income ratio that doesn't fit with what mortgage companies want right now. And in fact, in a lot of places, mortgage companies are asking for more down payment. They're asking for lesser debt to income. They're asking for a lot of different things to try to secure because they're offering this en masse, right? So they have to protect what type of money that they're lending out. They're trying to protect their loans. They have to stay in line with regulations that the government put in place as well since 2008. So there's a lot of things that they have to do that we don't have to do. So I can look at somebody's, I can ask, I simply have conversations with folks that apply for our houses. And I ask them questions about, where are they living now? What is life like now? Where do they work? What kind of income do they have? I will ask them, have you had any repos? evictions, foreclosures, bankruptcies, things like that. But that doesn't disqualify them. I just want to know the reason. And I'll tell you, like 99% of the cases, when they have any sort of criminal like conviction, it's usually, and I can actually go verify this because I can call the county or I can look up records about warrants and arrests and things like that. And usually it's 99% non-violent crimes. They're usually something ridiculous that really should never have even been convicted. So so I give them that type of leeway. And so somebody might ask, well, how do you assess the risk of bringing somebody in when you're not following it the same way as a bank? And honestly, the best way to mitigate risk is how much they're willing to put down, right? So if they have money and they're putting that much skin in the game, they're a lot less likely to leave the house or ditch the house or do something bad because they're actually putting a lot of money down to own that property, right? So they're not going to do bad things to the property. In fact, they're more than likely to improve the property. In some cases, rare cases, that doesn't happen, but usually there's a pretty good reason, and there's a process that we go through to either help them rectify it or help them move into a more affordable place. So I hope that answers part of your question.
So what I heard was when the man's trying to keep you down, Keyan's the man to call.
Yeah, we're one of them. It's honestly, there's a lot involved with this type of real estate transaction. So there's not a lot of us that do it in general. And especially, I think there's only maybe like 3 or 4 of us that do it national. So we're nationwide. We're doing this in every state.
Interesting. Now, when you say determining the amount of money, how much skin to get in the game, is there a standard practice that you follow? I know, when we think in very general terms about a bank mortgage, we're thinking about percentages
Right.
of overall value on the house, whether it's 10%, 15%. 20%. I can remember I've owned, at this point, I've owned 2 homes in my lifetime. And I can remember there being a policy many decades ago where they said, well, if you put down 25% of the value of the house, there are no questions asked. You just go in and basically, as long as you're not an imprisoned felon, you can
Those were the
probably
days,
get.
huh?
Yeah, those are the days. I consider that to be the home buyer's wild west. So is there any criteria like that, or is it too difficult to pin down what that percentage might be?
Yeah, so at a baseline, if we're doing an owner finance, we're usually looking about 15 to 20%. It depends on the price range of the house. We actually do a lot with houses that range somewhere between 70,000 and 180,000. That's kind of like where most of our houses are. But the thing is, depending on the market, you see some markets people have a lot more money, a lot more cash at hand, and some markets they don't. So we try to adjust based on that. So if we're saying that we're looking for 15% down, usually we're actually just looking for 15,000 down.
Okay.
When we're doing a rent to own, we're reducing the amount of down payment that they would require to lock in that purchase price. Usually we're looking for 5%. Now, if they can't come up with that 5%, then what we do is we reduce the upfront percentage. So let's say we go down to 2.5%, but we would increase the amount that they would pay on a monthly note. So if we're doing a rent to own, let's say the house rents for $1,200, and they're going to bring $3,500 as a down payment to lock in that purchase price. We would also get first and last month's rent. Okay, so it's a mix between the ownership and the rental amount. But their monthly note would be $1,200 plus a little bit extra to bring them up to 5% over time. So it would probably be $1,300, maybe $1,320 per month.
Okay.
And so by giving them terms and giving them time to add that money, it gives them a lot more flexibility. They can work towards building that down payment, and we give them the option to extend. Normally, a rent-to-own buyer will extend 1 to 2 more years, and so they can just keep renting, and part of their rent goes to the purchase price. Now, I will say on a rent-to-own, in some areas, we usually need to get about 3 different buyers before someone actually buys the house or goes into owner finance. And it's normally because of just life situations, not really financial. It's, they relocate, they get divorced, something happens. So that's something that we factor into our numbers and our projections.
Okay. Is
Life
it normally?
happens.
I'm sorry, what was that, Glenn?
Life happens.
Life happens.
It does. It does. Now, are the majority of the properties valued under $500,000 normally?
Yeah, most of them are. And the reason for that is when we're buying a house that is roughly four to $500,000, there's a little bit more risk assessed there. So we have to, when we buy a house, we actually don't usually buy it in cash. We usually buy it on terms. So if somebody's buying, if we're buying a house from anybody really, we will approach them and say, hey, look, if we bought it in cash, it would probably be this price. So let's say it's a $300,000 house, it would probably be, somewhere around, I'm guessing $220,000. And the reason is because as an investor, and this is common in our industry, we're usually buying at around 70 to 75% of the value. The reason for that is money's expensive. If we're using private money, we're paying interest on that. So based on how much money we're borrowing, we can only afford a certain amount to pay out each month to a lender. Now, in order to help a lot of sellers who don't need to sell right away, or they're not in some sort of financial strain or motivation where they have to take a significant discount, we actually prefer to offer terms. A homeowner who's in the north, let's say for example, and they're in the north, they're older, they want to retire in Florida, we can actually tell them, hey, look, your house doesn't have a mortgage. Why don't you treat this house as a proper investment? Leave your money in the home. You'll get paid more over time. So we give them a down payment. Let's say it's $20,000, and let's say they're willing to go 12 years. So we'll pay them monthly, roughly. It depends on the house what it's capable of bringing in as rental income. But let's say it's $1,500 to $2,000 a month for 12 to 15 years, and then a final payment that includes the remainder amount. So a $300,000 house over 12 years, they're actually going to get paid somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000. So we actually overpay for houses, and we can do this even with houses that have a mortgage. It's called a subject to, and we can take over payments for their mortgage and pay them on top of it.
Interesting.
Well, I think it's like we kind of talked about before, as you have adjustable economies, as things are changing in the markets or whatever, it's good to have more options and have more flexibilities. Otherwise, you kind of are stuck with things that you can't control.
Yeah, especially with COVID, we've encountered a lot of homes who had forbearance. A lot of states have attempted to do payment assistance programs, but I mean, it's state run, so you can only guess how effective that is. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I have a call.
And Keyan muted himself while the call came in, so his headset probably went to the other device. Not that I've ever done that before.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I wanted to make sure that sound wasn't interrupting us. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So as you can imagine, state-run programs aren't the most effective. So people are dealing now with forbearance being up, so that a year or two in, and now those mortgage companies are asking for a remainder of the payment. States are either taking too long to send that payment, or they claim that they sent it and the mortgage company claims they never received it. So they're dealing with foreclosures in different states, and that's where we come in and help them out.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on forbearance? I know a lot of people probably took advantage of that over the last year or two and probably didn't really understand what they were doing or what's going to be the long-term effect of getting forbearance or not paying your payments on your mortgage for a period of time.
Yeah, so forbearance is essentially a pause on making payments to your mortgage company without them being able to push for foreclosure during that time period. But the missed payments do accrue. So when that time period is done, that entire balance that was not paid would be due. So for a lot of folks, that means $20,000, $30,000 that are suddenly due. And once the forbearance is up, the mortgage companies are super, super excited to finally try to get either their money or take that house. So because they've essentially been floating those payments for a certain time. So there's a couple things to watch out for on this. The first is this is surprising, actually. I don't think a lot of people have seen this yet. The federal program HUD, which is it's the department that handles a lot of the transactions regarding real estate and home buyers assistance and home buyer programs. So the HUD department actually has an option for people where if they were in forbearance for COVID, they will pay 25% of the mortgage loan and take a promissory note back for 0% interest. So I'll give you one example. It's a Pennsylvania homeowner. Um, she owed about $20,000, and HUD offered to do that option for her. So she would be able to get her mortgage reduced down to 158. I think it was 158, and it's no longer in forbearance. It's no longer behind, and the rest of that money, which roughly 50,000, 56,000, would be due to the HUD department essentially. So there would be a second lien on the property with a note, $58,000 for 40 years, but 0% interest. So she wouldn't really have to pay that until later, right? The downside to this is that she had a 2.75% interest rate with the mortgage company, and this is considered a loan modification. So her interest rate would go up to 6.75, which is more every month than what she was already paying and behind on. So it's basically a way for the mortgage company to get cured and then still get the house later because she won't be able to afford it. So it's a little bit of a trap, and we have to be really careful with that.
And is it a trap only because the interest rates have gone up in the last couple of months?
That's the biggest thing. Yeah. And mortgage companies she didn't even request this. The mortgage company sent it to her. They sent it in mail and just said, "Hey, take this option." And because they know it's gonna be better for them. They're gonna get a way higher interest rate based on today's market.
Sure.
So,
well, it's kind of like receiving all those extended warranties on things. You wouldn't do it if there wasn't some money. You're not doing it to be gracious. I mean, I understand the concept of win-win, but sometimes that's tilted a little bit away from us, so, the consumers.
So you have a lot of people out there that didn't know what they were doing. And literally, like you said, I remember we had a neighbor right next to us in Las Vegas. It was a nurse. She was working, but they're like, "Oh, you can do this." And so in her thought, "Oh, I can have extra money to spend." And when that forbearance came due, you started seeing a lot of houses go on the market for sale because they couldn't afford the added payments.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if they had gone a little bit above and beyond, like if they actually cared about the homeowner and what type of situation they're going to be in later, they would have suggested, "Hey, let's set something up for you. What money you can put into this, put into an escrow account, put it away somewhere, budget for this, so you're not caught off guard when time comes due, because eventually this forbearance will end and you will have to resume your mortgage payments and actually pay back what was due." And even the HUD program, that could be good for some people. They just need to be aware to look for the interest rate changes and the differences in their loan modification. But for some people, once the forbearance is done, maybe they did increase income. Maybe they would be able to keep those payments. And the thing is, like, even if you buy a house now or refinance right now at a high interest rate, once interest rates go down, which I believe they ultimately will, just refinance again, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to look for a house and you're holding back because of interest rates right now, if you can afford it, just buy that house and then refinance when interest rates go down, because it's much better to refinance with interest rates that are lower than to pay for a house that's more expensive overall.
Okay.
And if you look at these things throughout history, I mean, inevitably, like we said, I think in a lot of these areas that had the big sharp highs, we're going to have some decent lows like you're talking about. So if you're looking at Vegas, California, any place like that, Phoenix, buying something this fall, next spring at a lower price, inevitably within the next 24 to 36 months, we'll have some type of correction again with the interest rates. So look at things long-term versus short-term.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say pretty much anything in life, you're always going to look at the short term, but you want to have some sort of idea of what your long term looks like. And that's pretty much how you're going to always make the better decisions. You can't predict everything, but you can at least, go in the right direction.
So in this extension of your business, Keyan, if you could, for our listeners, explain how your marketing acumen plays into all of this and how it is a big bonus to work with you.
Yeah, so the marketing side of it is super interesting because we originally started as lead generators in real estate, and we offered services for other investors. And when we discovered that there's a lot of different ways to do deals in real estate and help people in many different ways, but not everybody knows those ways, then we realized that a lot of people that we did generate through our lead gen channels, they weren't being serviced because these people didn't know how. So that's actually what prompted us to start our actual real estate buying and selling company. And so we, believe it or not, we have about 150 to 200 people looking to sell per day that we run through our systems nationwide. And whoever we can get in touch with or get responses from, I have a team of 5 people that are constantly having those conversations, seeing how we can solve their problems, what kind of solutions we can offer, and then just pushing them through to see if we can buy that house, save them from whatever burden they have, and then have a different team that will focus on finding a buyer for that house, a family that wants to own something. So the marketing aspect happens, it's 4 different ways where it plays a role. The first is in the role of identifying those sellers and being available to them. So they all come to us. We don't do any, spammy outbound SMS or calls. We do the marketing on the selling side so that we can find buyers who are interested, and they just maybe didn't know that this is even an option. A lot of people had no idea, and they're very thankful when they find out and they're able to get into the home. And the third way is with investors. So we don't do a large fund. We're not trying to buy big apartment complexes. So it's mostly been word of mouth through people in my network, in my masterminds, in my marketing groups, people like you guys, kind of spreading the word. So people who, they're working class or they have businesses and they don't want to leave their cash in the bank because cash in the bank is essentially trash. It just devalues over time, right? Inflation. Mm-hmm. And then they, rather than sticking all of their money in mutual funds that's subject to fluctuation and riskier things like crypto, they can diversify and put that money into one of these houses that we can buy from somebody and sell to somebody who wants to get into a home. So they can park their money in these houses, and it's just interest-only payments every month, and it's reliable. It's secured against the home. It's probably, I really haven't found, aside from insurance policies possibly, I haven't really found anything that's more secure of an investment for somebody that just wants to get a really good return. It's usually about 8 to 10% annualized. So 8 to 10% on money that is not going to fluctuate and it's going to come in every month regularly. That's a really good return for investors, and they're helping people out. So, those are 3 ways. And the 4th way is actually, I do have a personal belief that anyone who's in our company should benefit with the company. So we offer a lot of things. So we employ people that are domestic as well as overseas. And I do a lot of training with them to show them, here's how you do proper budgeting. Here's how you set up goals for yourself. Here's how you make sure that your performance receives certain rewards that make sure that you don't have to, want for things in the future. So everybody in our company is excited about what they do because they help people, but also they benefit the company and the company benefits them. And so that it's a win 4 ways around. And I think that's the most rewarding thing that we have found in our business. And it's what keeps us going through all the tough transactions and the tough problems in real estate and helping people and all the things that they have in their lives.
Well, that's a good enough reason for anybody to work with you anyway, Keyan.
Well, I'd love for that to be the case. So anybody who does think that is a great reason, we'd love to work with them.
Sure. Just another clarification. Is it exclusively single family homes? I know that's probably the bulk of what you do, but is it also condominiums and that sort of thing, or do you shy away from that?
Condominiums require a little bit more research. We don't exclude them, but normally there's going to be a little bit more research involved because they have HOAs. They have different ways that the insurance is handled for condo buildings, and some of them everybody pays flood insurance. Some of them individual has to pay for flood insurance. So we'll buy townhomes, condos, land, single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, things like that. We don't go typically above 4 units. Even some areas, actually, I'm looking for farmland. So if I can find farmland in a good area, good size, suitable soil, I could put a family in there that maybe didn't have, some income, but they want to manage a farm, and we can just start grow some crops and grow some animals, and that's deal with the food shortages one farm at a time. That's one of my goals.
It's a pure growth business.
Yeah, that's it.
Mhm.
And sometimes in some states, HOA should be called PIA.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, most of the time that's the case.
Well, and again, state by state, I know it was ridiculous. I was just talking with somebody here in the last year in the state of California. You don't get all your HOA documents and stuff like that until you put a bid down the house, and then you have the opportunity to just cancel and stuff like that. And I said, this is the stupidest, backwards thing I've ever heard of in my life.
Yeah, California is doing a lot of weird things. It's kind of like trickery. It's like there's one way to do persuasion and then the bad form of that manipulation, but then there's the whole like, oh yeah, you just won't know until you know. And there's a lot of little things like that. So
I think that's where the 3 shell game was created.
yeah, you're basically talking about the various do's and don'ts that the
Mhm.
HOA posts, but they don't tell you until your skin is actually in the game.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Cool.
yeah. It'll be really interesting because with HOAs they'll usually have bylaws sometimes that are very outdated or have some ridiculous things, or they're trying to protect who's kind of controlling that HOA.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, if you're going to buy a house in that situation, and there's an HOA, you always want to look at those bylaws. Don't just look at the price of the HOA. The
Mhm.
bylaws are the most important factor.
And the books.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people that have purchased homes in HOAs, and all of a sudden there's a big expense with a roof, with something else or whatnot, and then
Yep,
your HOA dues go up 200, 300%, and here goes your payment.
I've been through that.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
assessments every year.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, Keyan, thank you so much for joining us. If somebody was interested or would like to learn more about working with you, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, the easiest way would be using my name, Keyan, Keyan, at guaranteedbuyer.net. So, Guaranteed Buyer is our company, and that's our buying and selling organization. And we do try to be people's guaranteed buyer. We offer so many different options. There's a lot of ways that we can help a seller with a home and also a buyer get into a home. So, if you email me and you have something to offer, or if you'd like me to help you in any way, I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Well,
Cool.
thank you very much. This has been a great, eye-opening, and interesting topic.
Really.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for bringing us your very interesting perspectives and the insights that you've been gathering over this time. It's pretty amazing how expansive your business is growing. Bravo.
It's a very interesting industry, I will say that. But I appreciate you guys taking the time and inviting me back. And of course, if there's anything that I can offer in the future, any other insights, please let me know. I'm happy to offer whatever we experience or whatever things that we've learned in the industry. I'm happy to share.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, guys. Everyone, we'll see you back same time, same channels next week. Take care, everybody.